Welcome to the third dimension. 9 years on, Yemeni children's education has become one of the greatest casualties of the devastating conflict, according to UNICEF. Over 2 million school-age girls and boys are out of school as poverty, conflict, and lack of opportunities disrupt their education. To make matters worse, 2/3 of teachers in Yemen haven't received their regular salary for more than 8 years because of the conflict and new political divides. This puts around 4 million additional children at risk of disrupted education or dropping out as unpaid teachers quit to find other ways of providing for their families. Also, while the world countries compete in utilizing modern technology to develop education, students in Houthi-controlled areas are forced to study ideology-based curricula, leading many to abandon their education and join the fight as child soldiers. To discuss the education crisis in Yemen, joins me from Istanbul, Professor Shaker الأشول. Professor Shaker brings to the role more than 15 years of international experience of teaching in the United States. His writings focus on school education quality, innovation in education, and the Houthis' interventions in education. Welcome to the third dimension, Professor Shaker.
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad we're here to discuss this important issue and to the issue.
Okay. If I start with the latest report by UNICEF describing the crisis education in Yemen, saying Yemeni children education has become one of the greatest casualties of Yemen's devastating conflict. Now, building on this, Professor Shaker, how would you describe the current education crisis in the country?
As you had mentioned earlier, I think every country today and every nation is struggling with a lot of education issues because education is seen as the catalyst or the engine for any nation for future building. In Yemen, UNICEF described it as a crisis. I describe it as a catastrophe. The education situation in Yemen was not great to begin with. Although the country has seen an improvement in the number of schools built and the number of students who were enrolling in schools, reaching about 80% enrollment of school-age children. A lot of advancements were made in the field of education, only to gain basic literacy. Beginning in 2000, from 2000 to 2009, we began to see a decrease in the spending, in government spending on education, resulting again in exacerbating a lot of the challenges that were faced in the educational field by educators and administrators in schools and in the communities. This, of course, has been complicated by the Arab Spring and the events that followed 2011 in Yemen, resulting in political instability, which further added to lack of funding and huge disruption for the educational process in the country. And of course, made even worse by the Houthi takeover of the government and the conflict that ensued after that, and resulted in the huge devastation of this educational process. COVID also did not help, and so we are now dealing not with the crisis, but with the catastrophe. A catastrophe that not only impacting negatively the current events and contributing to prolonging the conflict, but also hindering and disabling Yemen from seeing a different future.
Okay. Now, one issue during conflict, Professor Shaker, is that now according to UNICEF, 2 million children are out of schools, and this number can jump to 6 million in future, which is quite frightening. Now, this makes students liable to what we call indoctrination and thus recruitment as child soldiers. What is your take on this?
I think our issues are not just limited to Houthi-controlled areas. We have to admit that in a country that is now divided and controlled by different factions, with education not being a priority, and definitely the quality of education, not only quality, we're talking about just basic access that has been hindered by all the factions, or that is not made a priority by all the factions. Of course, things are going to be, worse, and when education is used not only as a tool, to influence the ideology of the children, but as a tool to become basically a machinery of war soldiers. Unfortunately, the education in Yemen has been used as a political tool before by the previous regimes, and now the Houthi is extending this use from just a political use to a military use, converting schools into basically, camps of indoctrination and soldier making.
Okay, Dr. Shaker, if I may step in here, okay, when you just compared the education now and by the previous regime, at least there was no what we call kind of sectarian kind of teachings or injecting the curricula with what we call sectarian, I would call it teachings, okay? But now it's quite clear that they are working on curricula to infect minds of generations.
So, as I said, education in Yemen has been used as a political tool. And so, and this actually, the Houthi would argue that it was used and it had some sectarian nuances or sectarian inclinations. But what we could agree on is that the education system was not used to the extreme way, or in the extreme way that it is being used today,
exactly.
To influence, to create this kind of one-sided sectarian, I guess, kind of ideology that not only promotes the leaning or attract the leaning of individuals, but rather also create this war machine out of people who subscribe to this ideology. The Houthi is emphasizing a particular sect and wanting to implant this kind of ideology, not only to promote the popularity of the sect, but also to create a ready and willing fighting population out of the students who are in those schools.
Okay. If I might bring you now to the issue of Houthis privatizing state schools in their areas, okay, and making education what we call unaffordable for common families in Yemen. So what's your take on this?
Well, I think, it would be unfair for us to approach the issue of education by just focusing on Houthis. I think we have to recognize that all the parties in Yemen are, basically are in their own ways, destroying or basically the educational system. So the lack of funding on the Sharia side, for example, is also making it difficult for families and students to pursue their education. Equally so, what the Houthis are doing by insisting that, for example, teachers are not provided with their salaries, that these schools are not funded, therefore shifting the burden of financing the education to the families, which are already burdened by poverty and don't have the financial resources, making it difficult for families and to send their children to these schools, or making them more susceptible or more ready, to be recruited either for, to join the fights, or to join the market and then to eventually become available, should future fights or battles, become needed for them.
Okay. So in one way, Dr. Shakir, okay, of course we are discussing education in all Yemen, okay, but what is happening in the Houthi-run areas is something that raises alarm, you see. Now, another issue is, Dr. Shakir, perhaps you are following nowadays that teachers in the Houthi areas are on strike for now 4 weeks, okay, because they haven't got their salary. So in an education system in which a teacher does not get the payment, what kind of quality education do you expect then?
Absolutely. So I'm not a politician. I approach this as an educator. And so, I'm disturbed, I'm disheartened, I'm pained by, what I see. And I don't look, with this with any particular prism. So I'm disturbed by the events and things that happen in the Houthi side, by them not paying, the salaries to the teachers, by them, doing all of these actions to undermine education, the quality of education. And at the same time, I don't want to also let the Sharia off the hook. And I want to point out that they're not also, they are not making it easier for teachers also to do their jobs. So they are equally liable for, for not providing adequate funding, for not providing the better conditions for teachers to do their work and to be effective teachers. And so, systems promote their professional growth. Of course, they will not be able to provide a quality educational experience and a quality teaching experience for students. What we are seeing now is, teachers underpaid, and teachers don't have the financial resources, to take care of the family, to their families, forcing them to go and seek other jobs. So some of them are leaving the educational system and pursuing other jobs, and some of them are actually, taking additional jobs. In both of these cases, we are losing, talent, we are losing energy, we're losing expertise, and we're losing the potential of people whom we could even, develop to impact the students and to impact, the future of the nation.
Okay. Now, of course, the UNICEF has got some interventions to fix the status quo of education, Dr. Shakir. Now the question, either UNICEF or other international actors. Now the question is, how can such organization, ensure mandating, I will not use the word non-sectarian, Dr. Shakir, I will use the word non-politicized education as a right for Yemeni children?
And I think this is a mistake that Yemenis have been making over and over again, and that is looking at outside agencies, looking at other countries, to make that difference and to bring the change that is needed. No country, no nation, no organization is going to set any nation's educational agenda. This agenda has to be, set by the Yemenis, and so there has to be a collective agreement among Yemenis. There has to be a collective realization by all Yemenis that the future of Yemenis, the future of Yemen's stability, the futures of Yemen's progress and development depends on education. And so for that to happen, we have to neutralize education, and education has to be taken out of this warring equation that people are engaged in. UNICEF or the UN or any organizations, they are actually, incapable. This is almost like beyond their mandate. Their mandate, if they're able to do, they're even in their best case scenario or effort, the kind of help they are providing is almost, it's a great help, but it remains a small amount compared to what's needed. If we have 10.6 million students who need help and support, and having the right schools and having the right resources and having the right teachers in place, and UNICEF is helping 500,000, or if we have 1 million or 2 million displaced children, depending on whose statistics you believe, and UNICEF is helping 40,000, we know they are limited in their resources. So if they are limited in even providing the help, I don't see any UNICEF or any other organization capable of promoting or pushing this harder question of neutralizing education and making sure that that education is non-politicized. So I go back to say that this is a Yemeni decision, and this kind of decision has to come as a result of all of the Yemenis and all of the war and conflict realizing that we are basically moving that Yemenis are moving their nation into a gravestone if they don't stop, this continuous destruction of the educational system, as it is the destruction of their future.
Okay, so Professor Shaker, as a person who is specialized in education quality, especially school education quality, do you accept as a specialist that when world countries compete to modernize their education systems, the Houthis in Sana'a are injecting school curricula with, I would say, sectarian teachings that go back to the Stone Age? How do you react?
So I don't think people can disagree today about the damage the Houthis are doing to the educational system. I think dialing back all the progress that has been made is a huge crime against I guess the Yemeni people. And I think that's, so in one way, although people in other nations talk about, the quality of education, we're still talking about access to education. We're still talking about, access to classrooms. We still access to books, to the right teachers. We're still talking about having electricity and having washrooms and having water in these buildings, let alone having the kind of technology and having the computers and having the connectivity, which are a very advanced step for a nation like Yemen. So what the Houthis are doing, unfortunately, is basically instead of looking at the future and focusing on what to do to prepare the Yemeni youth for the future, so that they become more competitive and more economically and more basically prepared for the market that awaits them. And instead, I think they are, unfortunately, they keep looking at this back mirror and are more focused on this historical conflict and want to pull the whole nation and root them in this historical conflict. Everyone is looking at the future. Everyone is looking at 2030. Everyone is looking at 2050 to see and to try to explore what they could do to prepare their nations for that future, what they could do to prepare their youth today for that future. there was a time when we were basically, when we would have been happy with just preparing students to know how to read and write, and maybe if they learned English, that would have been a plus. And then we moved into, people just learning, computers and becoming, so we went from literacy to digital literacy. Today, we're talking about completely something else. Today, we're talking about soft skills that make people not only competitive locally, but competitive globally. And this kind of, future and this kind of challenge really is, make us puzzled. How could a nation, how could a leader today, how could any government today be invested in the past and be invested in creating, divisions and sectarian divisions in their nation and society, and ignoring and losing all of these opportunities to build for the future.
Okay. Now, Dr. Shaker, we will not talk only about UNICEF's interventions, okay? You, along with others, by the virtue of your position, I am talking about Yemeni academia abroad, okay? Okay, how can Yemeni academia abroad, okay, contribute to fix, okay, this education crisis in the country?
Yeah, so so if we're saying education for us is a crisis, catastrophe, for the Yemeni academics and the Yemeni expats, to do a major deal in fixing it, right? And so Yemeni academics, Yemeni expats have definitely a role to play. And in the past, we have tried to, to play that role as part of AYSP, American Association of Yemeni Scientists and Professionals. We were involved in sending books and computers to the universities in Sana'a between 2006 and 2009. And we were engaged in different activities to do that. It takes someone, to give. It takes someone to receive. Yeah. It takes academics to be engaged and to support the universities in the.
Yeah,
but it also takes.
Professor Shaker, if I may step in, I believe that initiative of academic or Yemeni academics in diaspora, I think it was meant for higher education, yes?
Yes, at the time, yes, correct.
Yeah. How can we make a similar initiative to help these Yemeni students to come back to schools nowadays, for instance? I'm talking about school children, not higher education.
Yeah, so higher education has its own, challenges also. And when we talk about education, I think we need to be, inclusive and talk about not only the K through 12 education, but also higher education.
Perhaps we can do a second part on higher education.
No problem.
If you confirm.
Going back to this, Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
So, but going back to this piece about, what can we do, as expats to impact K through 12 education? I can tell you that first, we don't have a lot of, a great number of educational experts outside of the country. We have a good number of educational experts inside the country, and I think we need to use those first. I think, I have to admit that what educational experts outside of the country can do in this realm is very limited. We can definitely share expertise. We can engage in conversations. We can review initiatives. But at the end, it will take the vision, the programs, and the intent and the strategy that these that the parties in control have for education. We can say that we are willing to do X, Y, and Z, but if we don't have counterparts inside the country who are willing, who have the vision and who have the investment and who are ready to put, who are ready to invest seriously in improving education, what we do and what we say will have no value and will not resonate anywhere. Having said that, we have to also admit that what we can do is very limited. It's noteworthy that there are a lot of organizations that can be involved. USAID can be involved. I know JITS can be involved. I know there are other organizations that can be involved. But it takes vision, initiative, strategy from the internal parties in control for these entities to actually have an impact and to have a role. But it will all, happen when we all realize that education is not a secondary, service or process that a nation needs to have. Yeah. It's actually the core and the root of the future, the peace building, progress and development for any nation and for any people.
Okay. Perhaps a final question, Dr. Shaker, okay, as an expert in education and an academic, Yemeni academic in diaspora, okay, how do you see the future of Yemeni education in less than a minute, please?
In less than a minute, I think, it remains very gloomy. I think, unfortunately, we have, islands of success. We have some positive examples here and there. I think there will, I guess, social action and social involvement by people, in different places can have minor impact locally. But I think overall, it remains a very dismal picture because I think the warring parties are still not realizing how critical education is for nation building, how critical it is for peace building, how critical it is for for the future, for progress, for development, and for life for our children. The interesting thing, that we have to point out is that I'm a Yemeni American, and when I hear American officials talk about the future, they talk about the future for their children. When I hear Yemeni politicians talk about the status quo, the situation or the conflicts, they always talk about the conflict in reference to what happens today. And I think that's the difference, and that's why education will always be last and will always suffer the consequence of such a strategy and such a policy.
With that remark, we come to the end of this interview, Professor Shaker. Thank you so much for your insights and your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So much. That's all for this week. See you next time with a new edition of The Third Dimension.